In 1981, Pope John Paul II wrote an apostolic exhortation called Familiaris Consortio. This was a document that he wrote on the role of the Christian family in the modern world. In it, the Holy Father wrote that the Christian family constitutes a specific revelation and realization of ecclesial communion, and for this reason, the family can and should be called a domestic church. As the church is a community of faith, hope, and love, so the Christian family, as a domestic church, is called to be a community of faith, hope, and love. Now today, we celebrate the feast day of the Holy Family of Nazareth, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And while they were the Holy Family, I think it's important for us to keep in mind that they were not a family without struggles or hardships. For example, while Scripture does not give us an account of Joseph's death, Mary and Jesus would have certainly experienced the sadness and loss of their husband and father when Joseph died. And then later on, when Jesus entered into his own passion and death, Mary was left to stand at the foot of her son's cross without the benefit of her husband Joseph at her side. In our gospel today that we read from Luke, we are given a first-hand account of what had to have been a traumatic experience for Mary and Joseph. They had gone to the city of Jerusalem, as was customary, to celebrate Passover, and wrongfully assumed that Jesus was in the group they were traveling with. When Jesus was discovered missing, Luke tells us that Mary and Joseph looked for 3 whole days before finding him. Now, many of you here are parents. Think about how you would feel if your child went missing. Think of the anxiety that you would feel. Think of the sickness that you would feel in the pit of your stomach. This is how Joseph and Mary must have felt. And then what would your reaction be to finding your child, knowing full well that your child intentionally stayed behind in a place where you had traveled? That's how Joseph and Mary must have felt. I suspect that they felt a combination of relief upon finding their child and at the same time being terribly upset. In fact, Mary goes on to ask Jesus, "Son, why have you done this to us?" I think that we would be safe in saying she was not happy. But that's really the point. They were a family with real emotions, with real joys, with real struggles, and real hardships. Yet at the same time, they were holy, and they sanctified the Christian family. This sanctification was accomplished by the ordinary ways in which they lived out their daily lives. Mary and Joseph taught their son how to talk and how to walk. I suspect that as a child, Mary told her son stories and prepared meals for him. For Joseph's part, Jesus learned the art of carpentry from his earthly father, who that would eventually be how he would go on to make a living as an adult, being a carpenter. Mary and Joseph would have cared for Jesus when he was sick, taught him how to pray, tucked him into bed at night. By all accounts, the Holy Family was on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. They were poor, and they probably struggled to make ends meet. Mary of Nazareth, Queen of Heaven, lived her earthly life as a wife and mother with very little extras, if any. Saint Joseph, universal patriarch of the church, worked very hard for little pay. They had to keep track of every dollar they earned, and yet they were the richest family in the world because they had one another. They were rich because they were holy, and they were holy because they personified what a Christian family looks like. Husband, wife, child. Model of faith, hope, and love. The ingredients that Pope John Paul II outlined in his document. Joseph and Mary were a husband and wife dedicated to one another, faithful to one another, loving toward one another and their child, Jesus. At its core, this is what a vocation to marriage and family life is all about. It is self-gift. It is a spouse giving the gift of him or herself for the good of the other spouse. It is willing the good of the sake of the other, for the sake of the other, and not for personal gain. This is what true love is all about. As a married couple, Mary and Joseph lived this out beautifully in the midst of their humble and simple home life. And so I think a lesson that we can learn from the Holy Family is that true richness of a family isn't in their material wealth, but in being together, in loving and supporting one another, in caring for one another, and having God in their lives. The true richness of a family is measured by their faith, hope, and love of one another and of God, the domestic church.